Okay. Okay, Megan, we are live now. Do me a favor and tell me if you can hear me. Okay, Megan, we are live now. Do me a favor and tell me if you can hear me. Okay, cool. Megan confirmed the audio is working. Thank you for that. That was my number one concern. Let me hook up one more thing here. We'll give people a couple of minutes and then we will get started. Just going to set up one more thing here because I'm also streaming on TikTok. Make sure that works. All right, Megan, one more question for you. Can you confirm that you can see the comments? I just want to make sure that those are actually visible to somebody other than me. Can't see the comments. Okay, interesting. Let me mess with this and see if I can get that visible. I wonder, Megan, maybe you could give refreshing your page a shot. I'm wondering if because it just went live like a second ago. Oh, okay. Looks like that worked. Awesome. Okay. Well, we're not going to delay. We're just going to jump right into it. Let's see. Cool. All right. First of all, hi. My name is Alex. I'm an immigration attorney here at McEntee Law Group. And today we are doing just a little immigration FAQ. If you've been here with us for other Fridays, usually first Fridays, you've seen our managing partner, Fiona McEntee, fielding questions about immigration generally and, you know, kind of the hot topics. Lately, it's about, you know, travel bans and, you know, embassy shutdowns, and it's all a bit of a nebulous waiting game. So what we did was we collected questions ahead of this stream. So we're going to address some of those in a minute. Also, feel free to shout out in the comments, you know, where you're at, any questions you might have. I can't give individual advice, and if it's too specific, I'm probably going to ask you to, you know, talk to an attorney, even if it's not me. And also, if you see me glancing off to the side here, shameless plug, I have a TikTok account. I'm over at Alex the Attorney, and I'm also live streaming there. So if you see me glancing off, that's what that is. So before we get into the FAQs, I'm just going to do a tiny immigration news update. We'll just talk about one story here. This happened last week. So in, I believe, 2019, the Trump administration issued an executive order saying that immigrant visa applicants, so people who are applying for visas to come to the United States as immigrants and then get green cards after the fact, were required to either prove that they were going to be, you know, insured, have health insurance within 30 days of entry to the United States, or prove that they had the financial means to pay reasonably foreseeable medical expenses. The purported policy reason for this was that, you know, we want to reduce the burden on the U.S. healthcare system. despite the fact that there's really not any evidence to show that immigrants are burdening the U.S. healthcare system. There was a study published by the American Journal of Public Health that said that recent immigrants to the U.S. were only responsible for about 1% of public health care expenditures, even though they represent 5% of the population. One of the reasons this was really difficult for people to meet, other than the obvious hurdles that anybody dealing with the U.S. healthcare system will face, is that there were a very limited number of plans that intending immigrants qualified for. And so it was very difficult to get insured. This was the subject of litigation in the Ninth Circuit for about a year and a half. And as of last week, the Biden administration, DHS, put out a memo saying that this rule was being rescinded, that it wasn't really in the interest of the United States, and it wasn't in line with the Biden policies of becoming a more welcoming, inclusive nation. So this is definitely good news for folks who are thinking about living in the United States permanently. It's just one less thing to worry about. All right, so that is my just kind of shameless news plug for now. So we are going to move right into the FAQs. These are all kind of running on the same thematic lines. It's the same issue that we have had since last May. Embassy closures, delays at USCIS, really difficult to get appointments for things. There's still a travel ban ongoing. Somebody was asking us if Biden had forgotten about this travel ban, and I don't think he did, but sometimes sometimes it might feel like that because there's just been very little, if any, information coming out about this. So I'm going to jump into the questions that relate to that. Somebody was asking specifically about, lack of appointments at the embassy and what's going on with that. And, the answer is yes. In most places, U.S. embassies abroad have not resumed normal functioning. They are subject to the same kinds of local lockdowns as any other business or government entity in that country. And it's not, the U.S. isn't really able to kind of strong arm them into opening. They're subject to whatever's going on locally. So a lot of them are still, shut down, or they're only, providing very limited services. They're prioritizing U.S. citizens. They are prioritizing very dire life and death kind of emergencies. And then from there, the problem is that we still have a backlog of folks whose interviews were canceled at the top of the pandemic, and they're still trying to get through those. Many embassies have kind of taken this tiered resumption of services approach. And so, we've seen a preview of some of these tiers, and it's pretty much what you would expect. They're prioritizing immediate family members of U.S. citizens, so spouses, children, parents, and then looking at other immigrant visa categories from there. But this is in no way a perfect system, and we've seen that it's really disrupting countless lives. We've seen married couples who have been separated. There's ongoing litigation about the diversity lottery because U.S. embassies just are not distributing these diversity visas that have a very strict cutoff at the end of the fiscal year. So that's the source of ongoing litigation, because the fact is, immigration attorneys have never seen a complete shutdown of the embassy system like this. It's really unprecedented. So the short answer is, unfortunately, yes. It's really tough to get appointments right now, especially if you're not kind of in a priority tier, or you don't qualify for an exception. This is especially true if you're from a country that has a travel ban in place. Obviously, we see this a lot for folks from Ireland. There's a list of very explicit exceptions, but if you don't qualify for one of those, we would have to see if you qualified for something called a national interest exception. They are extremely tough on them. We've seen some seen some approvals. We've also seen some truly ridiculous pushback and in some cases denials. The hope right now, and it's a hope and rumor only, is that the EU is talking about opening up travel to vaccinated US citizens, and the hope and prayer is that that will be a reciprocal agreement. But that's all rumor and speculation for now. That also has a lot to do with how the vaccination rate in that country compares to vaccination and positivity rates in the United States. So I'll use the Ireland example again. You know, the vaccine rollout is unfortunately slower in Ireland than it is in the US. And although the positivity rate is really, you know, it's looking pretty good in Ireland, especially compared to some parts of the US. But there's so many unknowns still. And it's really frustrating. I can only imagine what it's like to, you know, be separated and not have any ability to estimate, you know, when you'd be able to come in, or when you'd even just be able to travel to see family. I wish we had those answers, and we really just don't. So unfortunately, it's still a bit of a waiting game on that front. All right, we're going to shift over to, oh yeah, okay, so similar question. We've got a few folks asking about the delays of issuance of visas, not abroad, but stateside at USCIS. These questions weren't really referring to a specific visa. Visa processing times are going to depend on a few different factors. There are some that are pandemic dependent and some that are not. So one is that, you know, the US government's processing times can change at any time, even after you file. So that's always a bit of a gamble, unless you're fortunate enough to be, you know, in a visa category that has premium processing available. And, you know, if you're in a position where you're able to afford that, it's, you know, it's $2,500 US, it's pretty steep. That gives you some more predictability with the timeline, but that's not available for every immigration benefit. You know, right now there's kind of a push to expand premium processing availability. One of the prevailing arguments is that would, you know, solve some of USCIS's budget woes that they say they have, which is interesting for an agency that is primarily, you know, applicant fee funded. But no movement on that just yet. Unfortunately, everything is still taking a little bit longer because, you know, backlogs, limited staffing, you know, whatever the local lockdown conditions are in that state. You know, things are starting to open up in the US, so we're optimistic that, you know, they're going to be able to get more people into those, you know, service centers, or maybe it's going to be easier for officers to come in, pick up the cases and take them home. I understand that that's what they were doing before. I'm not sure if that's still happening now. That probably depends on your service center. But short answer, yeah, it's still delayed. We're still working through backlogs, and it's a lot of uncertainty. This is part of why. So I was part of the American Immigration Lawyers Association's AILA's National Day of Action, and this was one of the issues that we lobbied on before Congress, was just to call for transparency at USCIS, because a lot of this takes place in a black box. You know, they only give you so much information. They give you estimates on processing times at best. It makes it very difficult for us to advise any more concretely, and it makes it very difficult for the applicant to plan. You know, a lot of times you are in a position where you're sitting on your hands waiting for the government to make a decision. And, you know, the way we're seeing this manifest, you know, one of the worst ways we're seeing this manifest is with H-4 spouses. To make a very long story short, for anybody who's unfamiliar, an H-1B visa is a skilled worker, and if that skilled worker meets certain qualifications, their spouse may qualify for work authorization. Not all H-4 spouses do, but some do qualify. And many H-4 spouses are highly educated, highly skilled workers in their own right, but they are not able to premium process H-4 renewals. And generally speaking, the earliest you can apply for an H-4 renewal is 6 months before it expires. But right now, it's taking over a year for folks to get a work permit based on their H-4. And we're seeing a lot of skilled workers lose their jobs, lose their livelihoods, kind of throwing themselves at the mercy of their local congressional representative, assuming their local representative is willing to help them. And it's really unfortunate because there's just so little we can do. I would say if you're a U.S. citizen voter and this stuff matters to you, this impacts your neighbors, this impacts somebody you love, I think the best thing you can do is reach out to your congressional representative and put the pressure on them to put a little pressure on USCIS to be, more transparent and to consider ways that they might be able to kind of increase their bandwidth, because I think there are, very feasible solutions to this problem. Although they did roll out one thing that hopefully will improve things. So normally when you apply for an H-4 renewal, you have to go get biometrics done, and it's like a fingerprinting appointment, which is, kind of absurd if you have a recent set of prints on file. Sometimes they reuse them, sometimes they don't. But now they have eliminated that requirement for certain categories of dependents who applied after a certain date. Which is great because under the Trump administration, they were talking about expanding that to everybody for every benefit. Everyone was going to have to go get fingerprints done, even if you were under the age of 14, even if you'd had them done before. It just feels like this extra step that's like not really necessary if they already have your background check information on file. So, it's a slow kind of steady march towards marginal improvements. But, we're hopeful that things will continue to improve, but the best thing you can do to keep things improving is just keep the pressure on the government. I know they're juggling a lot of different priorities, but, they need to know what matters to their constituents. And as a U.S. citizen, you have a lot of privilege to be able to lobby your representative that way. So, my 2 cents is you got to use your privilege for good instead of evil. Thank you, Elizabeth. This is another attorney friend of mine from law school who has graciously offered to, hang out and watch this stream with us. All right, let's talk about the next question. Thoughts on applying for visas in third countries. All right, so here's how this breaks down. If you are, let's say you've got an approved petition for a visa classification. Let's say, I work on a lot of extraordinary ability visas. So let's say you got an approved O1, but you're outside the United States and you're physically located in a country that's subject to the travel ban. A lot of folks are asking, can I go to a third country that isn't banned to process it? And I researched this very shortly before getting on the call, but unfortunately, my understanding is no. Embassies abroad are already functioning very minimally. They are prioritizing U.S. citizens abroad. They are prioritizing their own citizens. And when there's such a limited number of appointments for those folks already, most of them are really not, they're not entertaining appointments for third country nationals, unfortunately. I would also say that if you're in a position where you need to return to the United States so urgently that you're willing to go travel to a third country and chill out in a hotel for 2 weeks, that, one, it's always a gamble because countries can always get added to the country, to the travel ban list. And we haven't seen many countries added, but India was added very recently. So there's always that risk. If you are willing to assume that risk and, sink all of that cost into going to a third country to cross your fingers, maybe get admitted to the United States. Again, that's always at the discretion of the US government, whether they want to do that or not. It is well worth your while to talk to an attorney. This is just, it's a constantly moving target. The process varies so much by where you're applying from, what the reasons are, if you qualify for a national interest exemption, what's the basis for your qualification? We found generally that they are less amenable to business emergencies and more amenable to humanitarian issues, which I understand, but I also, it kind of contradicts the purported, the policy purpose of the national interest exemption, which is, one of the categories is supposed to be, essential industries that support economic recovery from COVID-19. And if we, are not allowing those professionals to come in who, we've seen some pretty straightforward cases where, the argument is very clear, this person works in the healthcare sector, this person works in, IT essential infrastructure, and they're subject to the same kind of discretion as anybody else. And so if you're applying from a tough port, it's really not guaranteed. So I would say, third country national processing, unfortunately, a no-go for most places. And if this is something you are considering, I would strongly recommend you talk to an attorney before trying to attempt it on your own, especially because depending on the post, there are very specific rules you have to follow, including, if your national interest exemption request is denied, you usually have to wait a certain number of days before you could apply again. And, that may be time that you can't afford to lose. You kind of only get one shot at a first impression. So I'd say it is well worth your while. Talk to an attorney, somebody who deals with this regularly. I'm just going to check in on my TikTok really quick and see if we've got questions. If not, I have questions saved up from folks who have asked me questions in the past. I actually recently just got the feature on TikTok, and I don't know what triggers that. Maybe somebody in the comments can let me know, but I was very, very excited to get it. On a slightly different note, I guess this is more of like a news related thing, but I have put this on our firm website and, published articles about this before, but, for anybody who doesn't know me, you won't know that in law school, I took, as part of a trip and a course through my law school, I took 2 trips to family detention centers at the southern U.S.-Mexico border. So I went to volunteer at a center where women and children who, presented themselves at the border to seek asylum in the United States. It's kind of like the holding facility where they are detained until they can go state their claim in front of an asylum officer. So my job was to, come in with a group of student volunteers and help these women kind of navigate the process and figure out how to best state their claim, because sometimes they've just been through so much, and some of it fits better into the asylum box than other claims. And the U.S. asylum process is not exactly transparent or accessible to people, and so we wanted to go down to make sure that they had the guidance and the representation they needed. The reason I bring this up is because one of the questions I got on TikTok, and I'm going to make a separate one about this because this was like such a thoughtful question. I could talk about this all day. We have a pretty substantial number of, either separated or unaccompanied children at the U.S.-Mexico border, and, as well as adult asylum seekers. And the question is always, if not immigration detention, what's the alternative? Because, the argument is that, we don't have the infrastructure in place to just let people in. So I want to talk about what the alternatives to detention might look like. So in the U.S. asylum system, the way it works essentially, or at least the way it worked when I was there, is, you would state your asylum claim in front of an asylum officer. And you would basically kind of preliminarily prove that it was more likely than not that, if you went before a judge, you could state an effective asylum claim. When I was there, the approval rate was very, very, very high, like high 90s, to the point where it made all of us question, why this step is even necessary. So once they state that initial claim, they are required to appear in front of an immigration judge within a year. I mean, the year is the default rule. It usually gets delayed, especially now, but they have to appear in court to state their full asylum claim. And there are all kinds of barriers to entry there, but like the two biggest ones are barriers to access to counsel. That's cost, that's transit, that's just the limited availability of attorneys who are both experienced in asylum law and have the bandwidth to take them on. Part of the bandwidth problem is a lack of translators. So, most of the asylum seekers we were working with came from the Northern Triangle. So Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, some from Peru, but not a lot. But also there are folks who are, coming to the U.S. southern border from all over the world. They fly in to Mexico and go to the border and present themselves, which is, that's the legal process for, affirmatively requesting asylum. So the big problem is a lack of translators. So a lot of the women and children I met there were, they were forced out of their homes by, for the reasons you might expect for an asylum claim: gang violence, just rampant police corruption. I talked to a lot of police informants who were, forced out for it's like an anti-snitch culture. But another major reason that they get pushed out of their homes is, and asylum law doesn't necessarily recognize this, but they're climate refugees. They are indigenous folks who are living in the mountains or in the foothills of the mountains, and they're being forced out of their homes by mudslides. And the problem there is that they speak rare languages. They speak, Quiche, Mam, like all of these kind of indigenous languages that are not just rare in their own right, but also have rare dialects within them. So there's just like a severe lack of interpreters for the number of people who need help. And, it's really burdensome work for the interpreter. Like, it is very emotionally draining and very tough work. So alternatives to immigration detention look like giving people adequate access to counsel. Right now, there's no mechanism that, it's not like in U.S. criminal court, you get a public defender, right? You're not automatically entitled to counsel. So one of the alternatives to immigration detention that is not just effective, but also cost effective are their community-based programs. They're kind of wraparound services. So it's access to counsel, it's folks who make sure that you get to your, court dates, check-in dates, and the success rate for this is really, really high. When you're represented by immigration counsel, your likelihood of, for folks who are seeking asylum, their appearance in court, that rate is already really high, but once they have representation, it shoots into the 90s. And it is such a daunting, confusing, opaque system that I don't think anybody should have to go it alone or try if they have the alternative. But, many of these folks have no choice. And, a very kind of cost-effective solution to this is to support these community-based wraparound service programs that already exist. And just to invest in that infrastructure. I'm blanking on the name of one. Yes, it's Lutheran Immigrant and Refugee Services. This is an example of kind of a wraparound organization that's doing alternatives to detention. Let's see. I'm gonna go check in on my other list of questions here. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, so I got one more for you, and then maybe we'll tie it up for the day. I got this one a while ago from one of my TikTok followers, and it's a good one because it's a trope you see a lot in the movies. I think this person was specifically asking about, there's a Sandra Bullock, Ryan Reynolds movie called The Proposal, which is kind of about it's like a rom-com about the family-based immigration system. And so the question was, if you're applying for a marriage-based green card, how far does the government go to prove that you are in a bona fide real deal marriage? Because that's the basis for the whole application, right? How far will they go to investigate it? So, and what can they do? So this is an interesting question because I think, so first off, immigration officers are given a ton of discretion. So if you are going to a marriage-based green card interview, it is in many ways a roll of the dice. It's like who you get on that day can make your experience vary wildly. Generally speaking, when you go into the interview, they will ask you questions about, what's already in your application, kind of the timeline of your relationship, questions about, any kind of shared family, like children you might have, down to some like very nitty gritty questions that are, can feel a little bit invasive and weird. I know one common one is, what color are your bed sheets? And some people have no problem answering that. I remember one time we had a marriage-based green card like prep meeting, like a mock interview. We had a couple, like we had posed that question to them and they like simultaneously said teal. And I was like, all right, you guys are going to be fine. Now is not the time to argue about whether teal is blue or green. You want to kind of make sure you're on the same page with, the information. So for the most part, I've heard that like officers will say, if it's the real deal, sometimes they get a vibe, like they just know. And I have a problem with that because I feel like that's where the officer's implicit bias can come out, right? Things that can, kind of perk their suspicion are kind of rooted in assumptions that they're making about what constitutes a real relationship. For example, like what they might deem as a significant age gap or a significant cultural gap. Or if, maybe often when you're interviewed in the United States, you're interviewed together, but you can be separated and interviewed separately and they can like compare your answers. So, maybe if your answers aren't lining up or, you're not being super forthcoming, that can do it. And one thing I've seen both in the, I saw this more so in the asylum interview process, the credible fear interview process, but this can happen in any USCIS interview. It's a pretty intimidating process. It's a little bit weird to go to what feels like a DMV and sit across from this person who doesn't know you and, kind of like divulge all these like details about your personal life. Meanwhile, they're holding, it's this like extensive packet of documentation about you. And what can happen is, people get scared and they avoid eye contact. This can also be like a cultural thing, where like women especially are taught that they're not supposed to make eye contact with men because it's like challenging them. But, the American like norm, I'll use that term very loosely, is that you maintain eye contact. And if you don't, that's construed as being dishonest, which is not necessarily true. So if the officer suspects that there might be fraud, they can, in theory, they can investigate. They can request additional evidence. I know they can sometimes do visits. And again, this is why, it pays and it is well worth your while to work with an immigration attorney because they can help you navigate those things before they happen. They can catch things on, it's stuff that may not seem significant, like making sure that you're on the same page about your travel history and your address history. I know sometimes that's irritating for clients because I really harp on the address history especially, but we need to make sure that, everybody is on the same page, everything is consistent, because anything that kind of looks out of place might encourage them to dig a little deeper. And if there are issues, we need to address those before you even put yourself forward. Because that's your, the stakes are pretty high, right? Like that's your future in the United States with your spouse. And so, if you have the access and the means and the resources, I would highly, highly recommend, reaching out to an attorney before you file anything, really. And if resources and access is an issue, I know, one thing I know for sure is that the immigration attorneys I know and I've worked with are, incredibly generous people, maybe to a fault a little bit, generous with their knowledge and their time. And even if they're not able to assist, they'll usually be able to point you to somebody who is. So I would say, if any of this kind of rang a bell for you or raised questions for you, I just strongly encourage you talk to an attorney. It is well worth it. And if you're not able to talk to an attorney, I would reach out to one anyway and just see if maybe they can connect you to the right people. The other thing you can do is there's a website called Justia, and you can plug in your state and, immigration pro bono, and you'll be able to see all of the pro to low bono kind of resources in your area. So even if you're not able to retain a private attorney, you can at least talk to somebody who does this regularly. All right, well, I think we are probably going to wrap it up there. I've gotten through the lion's share of my questions. All right, we'll do our last minute little plugs here. So if you're here, that immigration is changing all the time and it's tough to keep up with. And there's also a lot of, kind of confusion and misinformation out there. I would encourage you, we keep our socials updated with immigration news weekly. If, there's stuff that's breaking, we're either going to do lives about it or we're going to post about it. And it's our job to kind of help folks parse through the noise so they can make informed decisions. So all that said, I'm going to encourage you to follow our socials. If you're here, you probably already are, but we also have a newsletter you can go on our website and sign up for. That's probably the best way to get notified when we do live events, when, we have pro bono clinics coming up. That's the best way to kind of get connected with that information. I'll also give you one last plug for my TikTok on a very selfish note. That's Alex the Attorney. I still can't believe nobody claimed that handle because there are a million of us. And I think that is, I'm just going to check the comment section one more time to make sure nothing else. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Nope. All right. I think we are good to go. Well, thank you for your time. I hope even a little bit of this was helpful. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to DM us on Instagram with them, comment them here. But I'll, do another live in a few weeks and I will be combing those comment sections for questions. So feel free to watch for those there. That's about it for me. Thanks so much for your time and have a great weekend.